profitable business dedicated to God that can create jobs where people are treated with dignity, where they get to make choices for how they use a greater amount of expendable income to provide for their kids, to educate them, and to provide food and medicine and all the things that we desire for a good life. Those things found their root in profitable businesses.
Of course, I've had the luxury of a couple of years now of kind of getting to know Sinapis, but can you kind of give us, the quick elevator pitch, like, what, where did the name come from? What does it mean? What do you guys do?
Yeah. So Sinapis is the Latin word for mustard seed. And we believe that one of the ways that you can understand that parable of that smallest seed that grows to become one of the largest plants in the garden and the birds come and nest in the branches is to see the role that kingdom entrepreneurs play in advancing the kingdom of God. And what we do as a result of that conviction is we train and accelerate entrepreneurs to build profitable, scalable businesses in emerging market nations.
I mean, let's talk a little bit about theology of work. I think, what was your personal awakening here? This idea that the marketplace could be a calling. I think still to this day, so many believers wrestle with that, right? There's this idea that if I really love Jesus, that I'll quit my secular job and I'll go, become a pastor. But what does this mean, this calling to the marketplace? How do we flesh that out in our theology, both here in the States and in places like Africa?
For me, that is really a story of my journey with the Lord. So I studied business in my undergrad, and frankly, I don't think I knew why. I had been told by people, you're going to go into business. And I think honestly, what I was looking for was, how can I have a life of comfort? How can I try to make a lot of money? How can I feel like I'm important in the world?
Right.
And I didn't understand at the time that God actually does call people to business. And so I got out, I studied investment management and got into that world. And then I had grown up in a Christian home. I was serious about my relationship with the Lord, though of course I had all sorts of things that I was working out and mistakes I was making. But in my 20s, I was part of this amazing house church experience with a group of believers who were trying to understand what's it mean to radically follow Christ. And at the time, I did not have a good theology of work. And I immediately was confronted by a lot of very strong feelings that if I'm really serious about God and I'm doing investment management with my day job, I'm just wasting my life. And it became really painful. And I remember lots of walks with my wife where, whether it was explicit or it was subtle, the theme was, what is Matthew going to be when he grows up? She got really, really tired of that. She was very gracious. And I have to trust the Lord's own calling on my life. And as he stirred in some early seeds that he had planted in my heart through some experiences of seeing poverty in Africa and some things that we were doing in Fort Wayne, Indiana with refugees, I became convinced God was calling me to the intersection point of a desire to see marketplace solutions alleviate poverty in my reading and my study. Thought this is the best, most sustainable way to get at the roots of these challenges, but how can we do this for Christ? And so I left that career and I went and joined a microfinance organization and spent 5.5 years learning about impoverished communities and what small businesses could mean to alleviate poverty and bring human flourishing. And the light bulb that went on when I got to travel around the world and see these principles was profitable business dedicated to God that can create jobs where people are treated with dignity, where they get to make choices for how they use a greater amount of expendable income to provide for their kids, to educate them, and to provide food and medicine and all the things that we desire for a good life. Those things found their root in profitable businesses.
Gosh, that's so good, man. It's so good. What are you seeing as far as the economy and its connection to real human people and lives and transformation?
Yeah, I think there's at least two parts of that. It's a great question. I think on one level, we can just create an abstract idea that the economy is this other thing.
Yeah.
And it's led by people who are only profit driven, and it's very impersonal and doesn't affect the lives of people. And sometimes I think that's really driven by the excesses that we see, and those are real. And
Yeah.
I have to be careful sometimes because I'm
100%.
passionate about the way that business can advance God's purposes, to not make sure that I don't say many of those critiques are right.
Yep.
But I think the other big concept for me is that theologically, the kingdom of God should be guiding how we think and navigate life on earth. It's what Jesus talked about more than anything else. And in the kingdom, he cares about how the physical realities of life play out. And what we see in the entrepreneurs that we serve and the businesses that they build, and especially the employees that they support, is not perfectly, but generally an unbelievable care for how that affects real families and real lives. One quick story that is one of the ones that we love best. One of our entrepreneurs is actually a couple named Grace and Greg, went through our training program and then our 6-month accelerator. And we were talking with them a couple of years ago about what was the biggest impact of the kingdom business training, the biblical instruction about how can business be used as a tool for blessing people. What impact did that make in your life? And they told a story of one of their employees, a young man named Peter. Peter was about 22 years old. He had come from Western Kenya, so he grew up in a rural village. And his parents sent him to Nairobi with hopes that Peter would be able to find employment and a life, because there was essentially nothing for him in the village. And when you stop and think about, as a parent, I mean, I've got 3 kids, you've got kids, what would it be like to send my child away,
Right.
almost no resources, with no connections, with no ability to help shelter and shape that experience, just with a prayer, Lord, please provide for him and let him make a life. So he comes to Nairobi and he's bouncing around from kind of odd job to odd job, and people are taking advantage of him and not paying him. And he connected with Grace and Greg. They lead a company called cakes.co.ke. It was the first bakery in Kenya to offer online ordering. They've got IT backgrounds, but also have a passion for this small business.
Do they ship to Indy?
They don't ship to Indy, but I'll ask them. But he hired on with them as a cleaner and as a delivery guy. Didn't have a lot of education, relatively low paying job, but afforded him dignity. And he was a hard worker and did a great job. Didn't say much, head down, just doing a great job. So one day Grace walks into the bakery and he pulls her aside, which is totally out of the ordinary, and says, "Could I speak with you for a moment?" She said, "Sure." And he said, "Because of this job, and because of the things that you've done to provide for us," and that had included, they were offering breakfast and lunch free for their employees because many of them didn't have enough food at home. They had made a commitment coming out of the course that they would pay employees first, which is not always common in Kenya.
Wow.
So I'll take my salary and then whatever's left over, I'll distribute among employees. They said, no, we're going to pay employees first. These are just things in the US that are normal business practice. In 9 months, because of that, Peter had saved enough money to build his parents in the village a new home. This is a guy near the poverty line who finds gainful employment with people who care about him as a person, provide some really good voluntary fringe benefits. And his mindset was, I'm going to pay this forward and build my parents a home that doesn't leak. And he asked them, would you come with me to the village to see what we've done? So they said yes. They took the whole staff, a couple 100 kilometers, went to the village. And what Greg says in the interview is, I'll never forget the look in his father's eyes as he thanked us for the role that we played in leading a business with integrity, caring about their son, helping him find a life. And the really cool thing is, Peter's not a cleaner any longer. He got promoted to the bakery team. He's got a career path in front of him. And it's just one simple story. It's not a blow your mind business that changes everything. They've got 16 employees, but because it's profitable, because it's led by people who love God, they're making a huge difference in the lives of people.
And I love that. I could listen to stories like that all day. So what would you say then to, a majority of believers are in the marketplace. Some of them are entrepreneurs, others work for large corporations. A lot of them are just going to work every day. And so many of them are wrestling to connect. They're believers. Their faith is the most important thing in their lives. And they just have this marketplace job. I mean, how would you encourage those folks today?
I think the first thing is I would really encourage all of us. It's been a personal passion of mine to start learning about what was Jesus talking about with the kingdom of God. Why did he care so much about the physical reality of people's lives in addition to their spiritual condition, and in addition to where they were going to be after they died? And I think it was a seamless picture that he was painting everywhere he went. The kingdom of God is seemingly just spilling out into his life, or into the lives of those that he's touching. And I think going with that, I would encourage people. I'm almost certain you can't see and probably don't appreciate the value of what you do in your job to advance God's purposes. And when I talk to people, they usually kind of shake their head or say, well, maybe. But to go back to what I said earlier, my own personal journey and my dualism, sacred and secular, physical and spiritual, things that really aren't biblical. And then I go to hard places in the world because of God's unique call on my life, and I see what they need. They need companies that grow and thrive and provide for people. They need accountants who can keep numbers really faithfully to help a company grow. They need people who work in healthcare. They need teachers. They need to just name the profession. When dedicated to God, that is spiritual. And it's not just a platform for sharing the gospel, even though that's great. And it's not just a means to give to the local church, even though that's great. That when the kingdom's spilling out of us like it was with Jesus everywhere he went, the work they're doing is spiritual. The excellence of that work is spiritual.
So good, man. So good. So tell us, what can we do to connect with Sinapis? How can we help? What do you guys need? I mean, what, if there are people out there that are saying, gosh, this really just resonates with me, how can they get connected with you?
Yeah, the first thing is to pray, especially during this time. So if the Lord is stirring in your heart, or this brings people to mind, or brings us to mind as you think about this, please pray for the entrepreneurs that we serve and pray for their employees. If you're interested in learning more about Sinapis, Sinapis is a nonprofit organization because we're not able to charge market rates for the training and acceleration services that we provide. We serve a group that's typically called the missing middle. So microfinance clients, those that are running really small micro businesses. And then there are companies that are large enough to attract capital and grow on their own. It's more of what we're used to here. The missing middle are those that exist in between that space. That's the demographic we target. That's where anywhere from 2/3 to 80% of new job creation around the world happens. And we see this in the US as well. But because these entrepreneurs can't pay rates that would be sustainable, we do raise money for those that say, I see a philanthropic investment in people like this as a catalytic way to bring the kingdom. So that's one way. If you're interested, you can go on our website. And then for those that are really curious about personal engagement, we are growing our capacity to have advisors and investors connect with the best businesses that we meet. And so if you say, and this is another thing to answer, why do I have this specialty? Maybe you're an investment banker and you think, what could possibly be spiritual beyond investment banking? I can tell you, I've got the answer to that question. It could be helping an entrepreneur raise capital in another part of the world. So if things like that, or you say, I've got some investment capital that I would be interested in putting into businesses that are creating jobs and sustaining livelihoods. That's another area where we would love to talk.